So there you have it. The current president, after the loss by his vice president to be the next president, has spoken for the first time since election night. So the world waited to hear from Kamala Harris after that loss until 4 p.m. yesterday. She did not do that right away. She did not call the president-elect Donald Trump right away. So it's been taking some time. And then today, after all of that, reports that this current president, Joe Biden, would be in the Rose Garden, and also that he had reached out to President-elect Donald Trump to congratulate him, to talk about the way forward in transition. I want to bring in now, and we have so much of our Fox family from the election night, and it's fabulous to have everybody here. Martha MacCallum, Bill Hemmer, Shannon Bream, John Roberts, and Kellyanne Conway. John Roberts, I'm going to come to you just to further this idea of time in transition. What did that accomplish for what's ahead as we look toward Donald Trump and January 20th, the inauguration?
Well, first of all, he said to the Democratic Party, look, we lost, setbacks are inevitable, but giving up is unacceptable. So it was a real call to the party to do some serious self-examination for the future. I noticed, though, Harris, that more so than I have seen him in the last year, he had a spring in his step when he came out of the Oval Office.
Out.
And you can kind of think what was going on in his mind, that, you know, I didn't lose to Donald Trump. I'm still 1-0 with Trump. Y'all threw me out unceremoniously back there at the beginning of July, and y'all lost the election. So he's going out with a clean record. I mean, you can think whatever you want about his legislative record and his record as president, but in terms of elections, he's never lost to Donald Trump, and that's something that falls to his vice president. There's one other point that I wanted to make. In terms of this idea of getting back up when you've been knocked down, the Democratic Party's got to do a lot of work to do that. But remember, it wasn't long ago that people were suggesting that the Republican Party was hopelessly fractured, that there was a Donald Trump wing of the party and there was a never Trump wing of the party, and that the Republicans might not ever win another election for the rest of history. Well, look what happened. They got the presidency, they got the Senate, and they may well get the House as well. So you can rebuild.
Martha MacCallum has joined us in studio along with Bill Hemmer. So I know we're going to look straight ahead with the cameras, but I want to acknowledge they're sitting right next to me, and we have Shannon and Kellyanne here too. So, Martha, I was watching you a little bit while everybody else was watching President Biden, because the other night you and Bret Baier had that front row seat to history, as we all did. You two called it. What did you think of his remarks, just in the tone, the tenor of it today?
So the thing that stands out the most, and I, like John, I think we all saw that he was in a pretty good mood. And I also think that since the mantle of the burden of running has been lifted off of Joe Biden, we have seen him, I think, look relieved. And I absolutely agree with what John just said, that he will go into history saying that he was the only person who beat former President Trump, and I think he's okay with that. The other thing is that he very much wanted to make this point that we laid down all these policies that will help people all across the country. He said in rural parts of the country, he was specific about, and in, other, corners of America. Here's the problem. Those places in America voted for Donald Trump. They did not see the fruits of that. And at one point he said it could take 10 years for people to see the impact of the legislature and the things we passed. Americans said, we're not waiting for that. And I think he also, it would have been great for him to talk about a rethink for his party, because he knows, he sees, he's a politician who's been around forever. He knows what went wrong on Tuesday night, and it's very deep-seated for his party.
You know, Bill, I thought it was interesting when he was talking about the way forward, so to speak, with the backdrop of what Peter Doocy had just reported just seconds before, and that is that the staff and team now are tasked in this transition period to try to enforce Biden worldviews. I mean, I guess this is like a huge legacy play, but she couldn't point to any of the strong, moments of policy, Kamala Harris, when she was running. Now he wants to make sure that what he did well, in his opinion, goes forward.
So when this was happening, Martha and I we were on the air yesterday when Kamala Harris came out, and I noticed that she didn't use the word congratulate, neither did he. She didn't say much about him yesterday. He didn't say much about her right now.
Just the top of his comments.
That was pretty much absent.
Yeah.
But I think there's the whole idea about having Donald Trump come to the White House. Let me tell you, it's a good idea for America. And so I'm encouraged to see that happening. He said we got the strongest economy in the world. Well, 70% of the people who voted on Tuesday told our Fox News voter analysis that America's on the wrong track. And frankly, that's a referendum in the last 4 years. That's a referendum on his presidency, as well as Kamala Harris's short campaign. With regard to your question, I thought Jack Keane made an excellent point this morning. We're talking to him on America's Newsroom with Dana. And we were wondering about the hot spots in the world, because there were fires that did not exist 4 years ago.
100%.
Fact. And he said his biggest challenge is that Russia and China, North Korea and Iran are now allies.
Mm-hmm. The enemy of the enemy is my friend.
And that's like, that's your focus, yep. That's your concentration. How you go at that relationship that's formed is, it's a big riddle right now,
well,
I think, today.
One thing that the Trump team has said, and you'll hear Larry Kudlow say this on Fox Business too, you go at it through money. Yes, sanctions, but also trade agreements and all sorts of things to put pressure on the avenues, the veins, if you will, in that part of the world. So that relationship that China likes to boast that it has with Vietnam, we have a good relationship now with Vietnam too. They share a border. That may be one of the first places that we would want to look at. And certainly, I mean, look at Taiwan, right? Shannon, I want to bring you in here and just get the Washington, D.C. perspective, because, you know, being in a cobalt blue state, New Jersey, for me personally, and you lived in New Jersey for a while. I think you still do, Martha. Biden took that state by double digits. Kamala Harris took it by 5 points.
That's right.
And that's not because every Democrat sat home. It's because either some of them voted for Trump, and they did, and a lot of people just didn't agree with stuff that came out of his mouth, that came out of Kamala Harris's mouth, meaning Biden, and they went a different way. And so New Jersey is not as blue as it was. I'll just say it that way. What is D.C. like? I mean, is it that divided with these lawmakers? Can they come together for the people?
Yeah, and that's going to be the question as these numbers settle and we found out exactly what's going on with the House and still waiting on some Senate races, too. That will matter to the Trump agenda. You know, as Martha mentioned, President Biden talked about the fact that, hey, we got things done. He talked about infrastructure, and he said some of this you're not going to see for years, kind of almost laying the groundwork. It seemed as if Trump has a successful 4 years to say, hey, a lot of that is what we did, and laying the foundation for him to be able to do that. But looking forward, we'll have to see how much of Trump's agenda he can move based on what the House and Senate does. Listen, already he's got that majority in the Senate to move things, to move nominees, and that's going to be very helpful to him in getting started. I do think it was good that President Biden did talk about, listen, he acknowledged there's a problem for Democrats, saying campaigns are about competing visions, and the American people did not choose our version of that vision. They did not do that. But he also said, you don't just love your country when you win, you don't just love your neighbor when you agree, and it sounded like some conciliatory language in there about trying to move forward.
Yes. Kellyanne, you've often said that the Democrats had a facts problem. They also have a relationship problem if their teams behind the scenes are getting along as poorly as Axios and some others have been reporting. And as what we're hearing today, Philadelphia Democratic Party Chairman Bob Brady said,
oh, boy.
Governor Shapiro should have been the pick for Kamala Harris. And Brady went on to say he never even, quote, had a conversation with the lady. He talked all about, you know, how poor the ground game was in Pennsylvania.
Harris, they shot back at him. I think this Bob Brady, Democratic chairman of the Philadelphia party. Now, she knows she's got to perform well there. She knows she has to perform well in the collar counties around Philadelphia to win Pennsylvania and then to win the presidency. And instead, the chairman of the party is saying, A, I never met her. B, that last-minute concert with Lady Gaga and Beyonce, and forgive me if I'm getting whatever celebrities there were wrong, the singers. He said that was an affront to local officials. And then he said that there was no, quote, ground game. There was no presence. Yeah. And then the Harris campaign shot back at their own Democratic chairman of Philadelphia, saying, we knocked on 2 million doors in Pennsylvania, which is, quote, 2 million more doors than Bob Brady knocked on. My goodness. So I want to get back to relationships. Kamala Harris had a difficult time separating herself from Joe Biden. Today, Joe Biden had a very easy time separating himself from Kamala Harris. And that, I think, is the message going forward. Jill Biden, Jill, famously said Kamala can go blank herself after she suggested that her husband, Joe Biden, was a racist who was for segregation and against busing when she was the little girl on that bus in that debate. It really infuriated Jill Biden. Many people have confirmed that.
Years ago.
Years ago. But today, I think Joe Biden gave her a little pat on the back and then distance himself. He wants to be seen as a semi-effective president who graciously stepped aside. I think that people will treat the Bidens eventually the way they've treated other people. Maybe the Carters, not in their hundreds, but years later, drummed out of Washington after one term, and then years later, people look at them a little bit more benevolently. Kamala's going to be looked at as a loser. And I think Joe Biden, the people in that audience are Joe Biden people. Yeah. They're standing for their boss, and I think people like Anita Dunn and Podesta, they're still upset that this woman came in there and acted like she had never even been part of the administration.
Yeah, you saw what I did. I know the camera cut over to John Podesta at some point, senior advisor, and you know, it was interesting to see some of the people. I asked my team automatically, well, who's in the audience? Because I thought it might be mostly media when I heard all the cheering and all of that. Martha, I want to end this with you. Was today the big moment? And I saw you surprised when it wrapped so quickly. Did he get done what he needed to do, Joe Biden?
I think it's just the beginning of his long goodbye is my assessment. And as Bill pointed out, I think it's a good thing that he wants President Trump, President-elect Trump now, to come to the White House. You know, these two men maybe have, you know, even with garbage slinging aside and all of this, have a few more things in common maybe than they have all the things that obviously divide them. Joe Biden wants a good legacy, and he knows that a smooth transition is something that will go towards that. And they also chatted after both assassination attempts. Hopefully that'll be the last of those conversations. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see. But I think this is the beginning of a long goodbye.
Well, he can say all of that, but people in his own party and some in the liberal media are trying to blame him for Vice President Kamala Harris's election loss. Despite the left's coordinated effort to push Biden out of the race, so we've heard, we're seeing headlines like these. Dems rage against Biden's arrogance. Blame Biden. Joe Biden gets blamed by Harris allies. And one op-ed carries the headline, Trump is president again, and Democrats can blame Biden's ego. You know, he didn't talk for very long today, Ari. And he seemed to take much more of a high road than some in the party are doing right now as they blame him. What do you think of all of that? I know it's a little palace intrigue, but the public is watching all of this after voting.
Well, first and foremost, he has amnesia. He forgot how the Democrats greeted Donald Trump when Trump came in 2017, with the resistance, with the attempt to overturn the election in the Electoral College, then accusing him of being an illegitimate president, the Steele dossier, all the things that they leaped on. So everything he said is platitudes that is not backed up by the actual real behavior of Democrats last time Trump came in. So let's see if they behave better this time as Trump is coming in. But as for Biden's role in all of this, look, the problem the Democrats have is they had the two most unpopular Democrats you can imagine, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, on the ticket. Biden had to drop out because he was so unpopular. Harris turned out to be worse than Biden, which is pretty amazing. When you look at how Donald Trump fared, the numbers he got, he won the popular vote, the Democrats have a party that is in deep trouble and is deeply out of touch. And it began with Joe Biden. He should have been a transitional president, as he promised, and stepped down after one term. Democrats should have had a contested primary to test who's best to take Trump on. They blew it because Biden blew it.
So, Leslie, I know on both your radio talk show and being a Fox News contributor and strategist, you probably have some thoughts about why what Ari just mentioned didn't happen. I mean, why didn't they have a contested primary? Why did it take a June 27th? The country could see Biden was struggling. And now that we know some of the backstory about former President Obama not being happy with him being on the ticket even at that point, now we're starting to kind of fill in some of the blanks. Why did they wait so long to help him do what they wanted him to do?
There's so much to unpack, and I wouldn't have the time to do it all. I always say, like this year, I think a lot of people agree with me. I couldn't wait till the election was over. My candidate didn't win, but I'm glad. Now I can't wait till the Monday morning quarterbacking, which I'm part of, is over. And the reason is this. I don't like the blame game. I really don't. Like I teach my kids, if you fail on a test, look at the problems you got wrong, what made you get them wrong, go to the teacher, go to a tutor, and try to get them right the next time. You know, elections, and Ari's been closer, working, in a White House than I have. But elections, sometimes Republicans win, sometimes Democrats Democrats win. Why do I feel that I don't feel that they should blame Joe Biden. Look, Joe Biden did beat Donald Trump in 2020. And I think that he and many in the Democratic Party felt that he could do it again. And when they were seeing that approval rating dropping, one, you can't just believe all the numbers. Come on, all the predictors were wrong in 2016 and now. Polls were not accurate.
You said that at the time. I mean, I didn't hear you rah-rah for Kamala Harris over Joe Biden. And I know you didn't like that process because you talked about it.
I wasn't a fan of the process, and people. I'm on national television. Everybody's gonna hate me for saying this. Look, people were like, "Are you crying?" No, I did in 2016, and the reason was I was more of a fan as Hillary Clinton as a president than Kamala Harris. I'm not poo-pooing Kamala Harris. I think she ran a great campaign in 107 days. That woman deserves a medal for that. But I do feel that my party missed 3 key areas when you see the polls, and we saw these, that people care about. That's the economy, that's crime, that's immigration. I do feel, I'm sorry, I do feel this country does have a problem with a woman in authority, and I say that as a Republican woman, too, because I would maybe vote for a Republican woman, because as a woman, I want a woman to run this country after over 200
But just not this particular one.
I'm not saying I'm not saying that's the reason. That's not the majority of the reason, in my opinion, at all. And the numbers show that's not the majority. The majority of the reason is people, even though the economy is robust and the best in the world right now, the people aren't feeling that. And I always say that it's what the voters feel versus what Wall Street reports and what media is reporting in their
headlines. Is it that hard, though, inside your party? You say that you think people are going to call, they're going to hate you, all that. Is there acrimony? I mean, I really want to know, because it looks like that's behind the scenes with what we're hearing with the 2 camps, the Biden camp and the Kamala Harris camp.
Is it that way? Look, I mean... anytime I open my mouth on national television, somebody that disagrees
well, sure,
with
there's
me,
ratio,
or says something bad, regardless of what side it comes from, I just ignore it. No, I mean, look, again, people are soul searching and they're saying, what do we need to do? Republicans did this when, the Democrats had incredible numbers in the Senate and the House and Obama, in 2008. Republicans did it then. We're doing it now. It's part of the process.
Yeah, that's interesting. By the way, we always have plenty of Christmas cookies for you. If you need that, Kaylee.
The economy is not the most robust in the world, and we know that and I get your point about how voters feel. Look, how they feel, our Fox News voter analysis, between 60 and 90% of voters thought the cost of housing, gas, and food was too high. That's a fact. Another fact, and I don't often say this, but I agree with Marie Harf entirely on this point. She thinks Biden couldn't have won, Kamala couldn't have won, a third party, Gavin Newsom, she didn't use his name, but someone outside could not have won. The structure was so deeply set against Democrats. We also learned in our Fox News poll, the retrospective approval of Donald Trump was about 50%. Yeah. The question about had he delivered and had he been tested was about 50%. Voters remembered better times. One quick note I just want to say, because I think it's important about the Biden remarks that played during your hour. Biden was very gracious there. Biden did not seem angry, did not seem bitter. And I had my money on Kamala sounding that way yesterday, because Biden was the one with the Neanderthal remark and the garbage remark, but he wasn't that there. Kamala, she used the word fight often. Biden said a much different tone, and I just want to commend him because I thought that was very well done, and I wish he would have had a chat with his vice president before she went out yesterday.
Well, we waited long enough. We thought maybe she could cook that up. I mean, it was 4 p.m. Eastern.
Long time.
All right, Emily.
Yeah, I think 2 things here. One, since we ended on the speech, my 2 cents, though, is that the struggle for the soul for America, which he brought up early on and said has been in occurrence since the inception, I take fault with, and I think it's untrue. And I think that was a remaining tendril from the narrative that we heard this entire time, which is that somehow we are fighting for good versus evil in the fabric of America, when, in my opinion, the opposite is true. America is pure and beautiful, and everything founded on it, the soul, is absolutely incredible. So I think there was, try as he might, there was a little leftover from the narrative of, if you vote for Donald Trump, the sky will fall if he gets into office. My thought about the blame game for Biden is that it's interesting to me, because I see it as such a myopic viewpoint. Everyone is only pointing at the campaign. What about the policies? Exactly. What about the presidency? So to me, the fact that everyone is looking around for who are we going to blame? Biden, he didn't get out fast enough, or he didn't campaign hard enough, or more positively enough for Kamala Harris. No, it was the presidency that was their doom, and there was no amount of campaigning, to the point you were making that our colleague said that there's no amount of campaigning that can rectify or correct the policies that led to the destruction of so many Americans' faith in the Democrat Party, in this administration in particular. And when you talk about, box checkings and gender identity and the like, all of that is reflected in those numbers and those data points, which were overwhelmingly in all groups skyrocketed for President Trump and plummeted for Kamala Harris.
Well, and I think we found out just by the raw numbers of people who had early voted, because in some places those ballots, that's why we don't have the count on the House yet, too. It was 84 million on Monday who had early voted by then. And so what's interesting to me about that is, while all the things were going on, a lot of people had already voted with the garbage comments and her trying to suddenly turn positive and all of that. It just was kind of too late, too little, too late, and the harm really was done more to her than it was to Trump with some of the things that were said down the stretch for the fewer voters that there were to vote on Election Day. And I mean millions. So, we had a robust turnout in this country. So by fewer, only a few.
Incredibly proud of her. And when he did decide to step aside, he immediately endorsed her. And the party unified behind her. They did.
He said that. My question is just if you can or want to address the criticism that's being directed at him for this loss.
There's going to be a lot of people who are going to say a lot of things. There's going to be election experts who are going to look under the hood in the next couple of days and weeks and months, as I've said already, and they're going to have their opinion on this race. What I can say is that, and this is something the president says all the time, you get knocked down, you get back up. And the president said this moments again. This is a defeat, but we are not defeated. And the president believed he made the right decision on behalf of the American people, on behalf of this country, to step aside. And we saw what happened in 2022 after the midterms. We saw where we were at that time. And this is how elections are. This is. It ebbs and flows. You win, you lose. And this is where we are today. What we're going to focus on is respecting the American people and how we move forward in the next 74 days.
Thank you, Karine. You talked about the influence that the 2022 midterms had on the president's thinking to decide to run for re-election. But around that time in 2023, polls showed that roughly 80% of Americans believed at that time that the president was too old to serve another term. Did he believe those voters were wrong?
What he believed is what 14 million voters decided in the primary, to make him and the vice president, obviously she was on the ticket, the nominee. That's what happened. 14 million for this current past primary. 14 million Americans decided that. So they made their decision on who they wanted. They did. That was decided. Now, as we know, in July, the president made a decision to step aside, and he immediately, again, decided to, without thought, without, second guessing, endorse the vice president. So you had 14 million Americans who made that decision in the primary.
But around that time in 2023, the president's team also very firmly encouraged other rising stars, luminaries in the party, people who had participated in the primaries in the 2020 cycle, to rally behind the president and not to consider their own ambitions. Was that the wrong call?
I'm not going to get into conversations. I'm not going to get into that reporting. It is not unusual for people to rally behind the leader of the party. In this case is in this case is Joe Biden for the Democratic Party. It is not unusual for that to happen. I'm not going to relitigate or get into what was said, not said. I actually don't have any information on that. What I can say is what the president decided to do, what the president believed, and what the president's going to continue to do is put the American people first. That is the most important thing for him.
Does the president have worries about what the country and what this office will look like after January 20th?
Look, the president is going to certainly, again, respect what majority of Americans decided. They decided they wanted Donald Trump to be president, and he's going to respect that. I don't want to get into hypotheticals about what's going to happen in the next administration, not happen in the next administration. We are proud. The president is incredibly proud of what he has been able to do for the American people. And that's going to continue to be his focus. I talked about the legislative focuses that we're going to have in the next 74 days. And he wants to continue to implement those historic legislations, now laws, that he was able to get done. And, you know, the next administration is going to inherit a strong economy, which he's very proud about. But I think for now, I'm going to leave it there.
And does the president hope to meet with the president-elect before leaving to go to South America, where he'll meet with world leaders?
What I can tell you, it'll be in the near future. We're going to work that out. Certainly his staff is going to work with the staff of the president-elect to find a time that works for both. I can't say the timing just yet, but certainly you all will know when that occurs. But I can say for sure it will be in the near future. Okay.
Thank you, Karine. So does the president believe that he could have beat Donald Trump?
What the president believes is that he did the right thing for the American people. I'm not going to get into, what could have, would have. He believed he did the right thing. He believed that the vice president ran a great campaign. He's incredibly proud of what she's been able to do and how she was able to unify the party and how she stepped up and was able to get running with a impressive campaign. And so that's what he believed. He thought it was the right thing to do. And here's the thing, the party unified behind her. And I think that's what is important. He believed he did the right thing.
So Republicans have threatened to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. Does the White House have any plans to take any actions to safeguard some of the measures, such as clean energy investments, for instance?
So a couple of things. I do want to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. That is a popular piece of legislation, obviously, that became law. That is, when you think about climate change, the most comprehensive law to be passed to deal with climate change. I talked about beating Big Pharma. When you think about Medicare now being able to negotiate, and not only that, you're obviously to negotiate to lower cost. I mean, there is so much that comes out of the Inflation Reduction Act. Only Democrats voted for it. You have heard us warn about Congress trying to repeal that, and it is popular. We saw what happened when they tried to repeal the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, which became popular and helped tens of millions of people get health care. And so that should be a warning for them. That should be a warning for them, not to go after something that actually helps the American people, that actually delivers on key priorities, and that is actually popular. So I'll leave it there.
And it sounds like that is being looked at internally as potentially one of the causes of this outcome. But Richie Torres, the congressman, tweeted, Donald Trump has no greater friend than the far left, which has managed to alienate historic numbers of Latinos, blacks, Asians, and Jews from the Democratic Party with absurdities like defund the police or from the river to the sea or Latinx. Is the administration, the campaign, the Democratic Party looking at the pandemic as the cause rather than, is that easier than looking in the mirror?
So look, let's step back here. I think I've been, and the president and the vice president has been pretty clear in understanding that the American people have spoken and respecting that. I think we have tried to be incredibly respectful of what happened 2 nights ago. And we're going to continue to do that. And I'm not going to speak to every person in the Democratic Party who has an opinion or a thought. I'm just not. It is not something that I'm going to do. I talked about the political toll on incumbent parties around the world as a data point, right? As something that we have seen pretty consistently with G7 allies in this time. And obviously, one of the things that occurred was the pandemic. It did. It caused disruption. It caused the supply chain to be disrupted. and and caused the economy to be turned upside down. While we put policies, and we are, in fact, leading the world on the economy, it doesn't stop the fact that there has been a political toll for incumbents. That is something that I'm telling you as a data point to share, because we know that you guys would have questions. That's a data point that I'm using. And I'm also saying that there's going to be election experts in the next days, weeks, months, who are going to, again, looking under the hood, kick the tires, trying to figure out exactly what happened 2 nights ago. And so they're the pundits. They're going to speak to that. They're the experts, and so we'll have more information as they look at the data. And so we'll leave that to them. And so I'm offering you our perspective, our thoughts, how we're going to move forward the next 74 days. And I think what Americans should be assured of is that this is a president that's going to put the American people first. That's what people can be assured for.
Is examination happening at all inside, though? Because as Gabe mentioned, this administration messaged to millions of Americans that they're going to wake up the day after the election if Trump won and have their rights stripped away, that democracy would crumble, and the president said today we're going to be okay. So how do you square that?
I can square that. I'm going to square that in a way that hopefully makes sense, because I've been answering this question multiple times. The American people made the decision. There was an election 2 nights ago. There was. And it was a free and fair election. And we respect the election process. We do. And Americans spoke. And so the job of the president is to make sure we respect that. The job of the president is to make sure that we have a peaceful transfer of power. That is what the American people deserve. And that's what we're going to, it's not complicated. It's truly as simple as that. As simple as that. The president called the president-elect, invited him to the White House. You know why? Because that's customary. That is customary. That is what you do. If you respect what the American people decided, that's what you do. And that's what the president's going to make sure that the Trump transition has what it needs, which is being led, obviously, by our chief of staff here. Why? Because the president wants to lead by example. It's not complicated. It really isn't. And, that's important.
By example, is the message to people who are fearful based on what the messaging was about mistakes?
Well, now you're just twisting everything around, and that's really unfair. No, it is. No, Jackie, it's unfair, because I've been standing here trying to be very respectful to what happened the last 2 nights ago. Being respectful. I've been standing here saying that we respect the decision that the American people made. I've been standing here and saying that the president's going to put the American people first. I've been standing here talking about how the president's going to make sure that they get what they deserve, which is a peaceful transfer of power. I do not appreciate having my words twisted. That is, I have been very clear, very clear about what the president wants to do, and the vice president. We want to make sure that we deliver for the American people. They deserve a peaceful transfer of power, and that's what you're going to see. Thanks, everybody.
The big guy's breaking his silence. Joe Biden emerging from his timeout after Kamala yanked him off the campaign trail for calling Trump supporters trash. The president had a big goofy grin on his face, looking vindicated and liberated after Nancy Pelosi's mutiny cratered harder than one of the stocks she just dumped. Biden reacting to his Veep's crushing defeat to Donald Trump.
The people vote and choose their own leaders, and they do it peacefully. And we're in a democracy. The will of the people always prevails. Yesterday, I also spoke with Vice President Harris. She has a backbone like a ramrod. She has great character, true character. She gave her whole heart and effort. Something I hope we can do, no matter who you voted for, is see each other not as adversaries, but as fellow Americans. Bring down the temperature. Setbacks are unavoidable, but giving up is unforgivable.
It's also the first time we got to hear from the binder on Kamala's defeat. And things got a little heated when the White House's fear-mongering hypocrisy got called out. Watch.
This administration message to millions of Americans that they're going to wake up the day after the election if Trump won and have their rights stripped away, that democracy would crumble, and the president said today we're going to be okay. So how do you square that?
We respect the election process.
Is the message to people who are fearful based on what the messaging was about mistakes?
Well, now you're just twisting everything around, and that's really unfair. I do not appreciate having my words twisted. That is, I have been very clear, very clear about what the president wants to do.
But Team Biden isn't going to let a bunch of dog-faced pony soldiers blame Joe for Kamala's embarrassing loss. No, no, no. They ran to the Atlantic to boast about how Joe would have won this thing. Quote, members of Biden's clan continue to stoke the delusion that its paterfamilias would have won the election. And some of his advisors feared that he might publicly voice that deeply misguided view. But it looks like the finger pointing is in every direction.
He promised to be a transitional president. When he decided to stay, the Democrats were in a quandary because they were expecting him to leave.
Can you imagine blaming Joe Biden for her loss? She lost, he didn't lose.
It was basically, if anyone has seen Game of Thrones, it was a red wedding. It was a bloodbath. So everyone is in a state of shock.
You did say in an interview last night that you thought that Tim Walz was part of the problem.
I do. Well, I'm biased. I'm from Pennsylvania.
All right, we do have a Democrat here at the table. We'd like you to begin finger pointing. Go ahead.
It's good to be with everybody. What a night. Congratulations again to President Trump. And congrats to those Senate Republicans and other House Republicans. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Maybe they run the gamut here. I've listened to some of the Democrats here, Jesse, over the last several days, and listened to some Republicans. And here's my takeaway. Democrats need to listen, and I would argue some traditional Republicans need to listen. Everyone thought 2016 was an aberration, that Donald Trump couldn't have been elected because he basically betrayed a lot of the things the Republicans thought they needed to do in order to win. They thought they needed to have a different kind of immigration policy. They thought they needed to be a different kind of inclusive. Donald Trump was inclusive, but his inclusion dealt with economic issues. He wanted to deal with the economic anxieties and frustrations of Americans. So in many ways, this victory of his just 2 days ago, it seems like it was longer, was conventional in the sense that it's always about the economy. Democrats wanted to paint this race as being a referendum on democracy, and it was. Most Americans, however, describe democracy as having neighborhoods that were crime-free, having borders that were secure, having their little girls not be concerned if little boys are going to play in their sports, let alone come in their bathrooms. And Democrats tried to push on people, particularly liberal Democrats, had this sense that endless whining and crying, endless condescension, endless judging of people somehow or another would make people come to their side. As a party, we have to understand that doesn't work. And people are entitled to their own versions of freedom. Now, Republicans and Americans who supported Donald Trump, they aren't Hitler-like or fascist. There's nothing wrong with them for making the calculation that Donald Trump could do a better job for me than Kamala Harris. I think as Kamala Harris looks back at this race, she'll have some regrets about, should I have done more interviews? Should I have explained better my position on issues? Should I have talked about my differences with Joe Biden earlier? I think the recriminations about whether Biden should have stepped down earlier is probably an argument that can be had there. But at the end of the day, when you're the nominee, you've got to be the nominee. And those in our party who are way to the left, who are described as progressives and liberals, I think there's a wake-up call for them because they are a part of our party. But their voices cannot be the dominant ones any longer if indeed we want to win. What happened on Tuesday was historic. A guy who many in my party believe is Hitler was elected for the second time with as broad a coalition as I've seen in Republican, racially, religious, ethnic diversity. It was a meaningful and measurable victory by him. And for Democrats to try to chalk this up as you people don't understand what you've done, America's going. I believe in America as much today as I did on Monday. And I believe my party has to change to ensure that our values and our priorities are aligned with the majority of Americans, because clearly, as we sit here today, they're not.
Well said. You know who seemed changed, Judge Jeanine? Joe Biden seemed like he had a little pep in his step today. Did you notice that?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. That's really surprising. Look, Joe Biden knows that he outperformed Kamala when he ran in 2020, and in virtually every state and with every group. So he can leave office saying, you know, I did the right thing for the party, and you suckers, I could have won this. But you know what? It's shame on the Democrat Party. I mean, how blind are they? They are the ones who claim that they were saving democracy. And the truth is they destroyed democracy by not even allowing a primary in their own party, by saying we're going to allow this woman who never got one vote to be a vice presidential candidate when she ran for president in 2019. She didn't get one vote to run for president in the 2024 race. And they talk about democracy. They just moved her up. She just kept getting moved up. And how non-introspective can they be to not realize the woman didn't answer any questions? It was as though here she is, this understudy in the White House for 4 years who can't even articulate how she's changed, what she believes, how she's going to help America. They just weren't credible. And you know who knew it? The Raging Cajun. He knew it. He said, you know what? You people are speaking nonsense to the American people, which is why Donald Trump, and he's not Hitler and he's not a fascist, which is why he won, because they don't believe the Democrat Party, and they better change their approach or they're not going to win again for a long time. And finally, you know, Nancy Pelosi, I mean, she gets up and says Joe Biden belongs on Mount Rushmore, but she arranges the coup. I mean, they're not believable.
You know what the Democrats aren't pointing fingers at? The border, the spending, all the stuff that got us into this mess.
There's plenty of blame to go around. This is a phrase I just coined in the commercial break earlier before. There's also this. She raised over $1 billion in that 4 months, 107 days. On October 16th, she had $118 million in the bank. And they ended the campaign $20 million in debt. Like, are these the kind of people you want?
Yeah.
First of all, in charge of the federal, your tax dollars, but also they asked their supporters for so much money, and they sold them a bill of goods on. They still are, yeah. And they sold them. And that morning, they told everyone that they could win all 7 states, right? So I think that the blame is not just at the candidates and the message and the policies, but also at their consultants who fleece them and their supporters for not only their money, but their time. I also think that there might be something happening. Seth Moulton is a congressman, Democrat, who is an independent thinker, or a war veteran. But he said something today that I think is interesting. If I could read from my phone, sorry, I didn't print it out. He said, Democrats spend way too much time trying not to offend anyone rather than being brutally honest about the challenge many Americans face. I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that. So a lot of the blame also needs to go to the people who are on the extremes, who run a lot of the social media and the cable producers, who are basically making common sense the enemy of the Democratic Party.
You're hearing that a lot, that Kamala was afraid to offend people. That's why she ran such a lame campaign.
Well, I mean, there is a counterintuitive truth here. Like, it's good to be risk averse, but when action is necessary, it's the worst. She was the most risk averse person we've ever seen. It paralyzed her when she spoke. She was afraid to say something wrong. She didn't do anything out of fear. And then she's put up against Trump, who has lived an entire life of calculating and taking risks. He understands that actions are temporary. You can see what he used to say, let's see what happens. He would see what happens. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Democrats created this fallacy that if you did something, it was permanent. You know, it was like, oh, if you reduce immigration, we have no more immigrants. No, we're just actually reducing it. It's like it's like a temperature. You can raise it, you can lower it. Anyway, another story. I'm still trying to figure, what does paterfamilias mean?
I don't know.
All right. So
I don't know what I read.
I was shocked by a number of things that Biden said. We're going to be okay. He said that, which is really weird when your country's run by Hitler. You know, maybe he didn't mean that. Maybe none of them meant it. They had the audacity, you know, to come out and tell people to turn down the temperature. He said, we're going to turn down the temperature. Joe Biden is like the political version of gain of function. You know, he's trying to cure the disease that he himself created.
Nice.
You know what I mean? Thank you very much. He did look happy. He looked relieved, but you would too if you got bumped from a flight that just went down in flames. No one can say he lost to Donald Trump. They could say he's president barely. In a weird way, he's like Harrison Ford in Air Force One, a fictional president who spent the entire time hiding and trying to save his family. If you remember that movie. But when you make a deal with the devil ultimately collects, and that's what happened on Tuesday. They chose Joe and masqueraded him as a cogent, moderate leader. He was neither. They tried to bamboozle an electorate in order to beat Orange Hitler. The bill came due November 5th. If they hadn't have done that, do you know what? Trump might be leaving in 2 months instead of coming in at 2 months.
That's true.
So all they did was they put off the inevitable.
What was the movie with Nicolas Cage? Con Air.
Con Air.
I love that
movie. So while I was talking, Harold, you were thinking about that. Like I'm sitting here, I was talking, and you were going like, "Who was that? What was that movie?"
I kind of zoned out when you said Air Force One. I started thinking about Con Air.
Like the last minute of your comments on Monday.
Oh, Harold. California Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom is calling for a special legislative session to safeguard the state's progressive policies on climate change, reproductive rights, and immigration. The move comes following, obviously, President-elect Trump's major victory across the country. Newsom says the freedoms Californians hold dear are under attack, and he will not sit idle, in his words. He says lawmakers are ready to Trump-proof California's state laws.
We have been intentional about building community and building coalitions, bringing people together from every walk of life and background, united by love of country, with enthusiasm and joy in our fight for America's future.
Vice President Harris in the concession speech the other day. Let's get some insight about where Democrats go from here. Joining us tonight, Washington State Congressman, Democrat Adam Smith. Congressman, thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks,
What's
Brett.
your 30,000-foot take from this election and the reaction to it in your party?
Look, there's a lot of different factors here, but I will say bluntly, I think our party needs to do a better job of standing up against some of the extreme left policies that have really propelled Donald Trump forward. And I'd give the same advice to Gavin Newsom that I'm going to give to our new governor, Bob Ferguson, here in the state of Washington. If you want to stand up to Trump, I suggest you don't ever mention him. I suggest you govern well. We have many challenges. I represent, a portion of Seattle and the King County area. We have problems with crime, homelessness, drug abuse, and just inefficient and ineffective government in too many places. If we want to offer an alternative to Trump, then offer an alternative. Govern. Deal with the challenges we face. Let's stop with the, I'm going to stop Trump. I'm going to stand. Oh, great. Okay. What are you doing for the state of Washington? What are you doing for the state of California? What are you doing about the challenges that we face in districts like mine? Mm-hmm. So I hope that would be the approach. Going forward, that's the most important thing in my view.
You're quoted in the Wall Street Journal, and it says Representative Adam Smith, top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, ticked off a laundry list of progressive priorities, such as defunding the police or embracing policies that enabled millions of migrants to cross the border illegally, that he said had tarnished the party and Vice President Kamala Harris didn't fully address in her campaign. She didn't want to offend the extreme left. Well, the extreme left is leading us into a ditch. It's pretty cut and dry in that quote.
Yeah, no, and I feel that way. And, part of the problem, and I've been trying to deal with this here in King County, is even as these policies go forward, when I try to work with local Democratic elected officials, many of whom I know don't support these policies, they sort of pretend like they don't exist. Okay, like, oh, no, we're not doing that. And then I dig a little deeper and I said, well, yeah, we kind of are doing that. Why don't we change it? And please understand, I say this from a very progressive standpoint. I believe in equality. I believe in opportunity. I believe that racism and sexism are problems in this country. But you don't address those issues by focusing on academic language, having an obsession with identity politics, not securing the border and not securing our neighborhoods. And another big issue for us is just efficient government. I mean, we got a major housing problem in King County. I agree that part of the problem that we have homelessness is because we haven't built enough housing. But where's the efficient, effective government to get that done? You know, you've heard the story of the $1.7 million toilet in San Francisco, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You know, they were going to build a toilet. Was going to work because they've got like 11 different commissions, and they have to include absolutely everybody before they make a decision. I mean, and believe me, you know this, Brett. We've talked. I'm not a Trump fan.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot not to like there, but we have to offer a reasonable alternative. Personally, I think January 6th was disqualifying. The American people apparently don't agree. So we have to begin to address the issues that are really upsetting people about Democratic leadership.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting. Just the size of the win also affects kind of the analysis of what you do post-election. I want to ask you if you feel confident about the House. You know, it's leaning, it seems like it's going to be a House controlled by the... You don't?
Sorry to consider it, but no, come on. We no longer have to act positive in order to keep people fired up for the election. The election happened. I can look at numbers as well as anybody else can. No, I mean, I do not feel confident about the House.
So let me just ask the race out there, Democrat Marie Gluesenkamp Perez against GOP Joe Kent. Is she able to fight gravity if
yes, absolutely.
Trump has done so well?
Great example. I feel very confident about Marie. And I think that's a great lesson. Look at 4 of the more vulnerable House seats in the country. Marie's race, Jared Golden's race, Don Davis in North Carolina, and Gabe Vasquez in New Mexico. They all ran on a very centrist, in some cases conservative message. In Marie's case, in Washington State, she was criticized by the Washington State Democratic Party for some of her votes and some of the positions she's taken. They threatened her with a primary, all right? And she went out there and won in a Trump +6 district, okay, by delivering a message that was responsive to the needs of her constituents. I think we should learn a lot.
Do you think, Congressman, that's the message? That's the message, the moderate kind of, I'm going to work on whether solving problems across the aisle, that's the message, you think, like Marie's message, that your party should follow?
A little bit, but it's also got to be very focused on the working class, on jobs, on effective government, on helping people, and less on some of the more academic issues. And also, we have a real problem with law and order. I mean, the whole defund police, abolish the criminal justice system. I want to help people. You also have to hold people responsible. The notion that people are in no way responsible for the crimes they commit, the drugs they abuse, or their inability to take care of themselves is simply wrong. Now, there are other factors.
Yeah.
Root causes matter. Having enough support for people matters, and I want to do that. But we can't completely take individual responsibility out of that piece. People need to be held accountable. I don't understand why within so much of the Democratic Party you can't hold 2 ideas in your head at once. Number 1, people are suffering. We need to help them. Number 2, they need to.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.